So that's a really helpful picture of kind of the secular landscape. When it comes to, I know you do a ton of training on this stuff. So when it comes to like just the biblical witness and what the biblical witness says about sexual ethics, sexuality, male and female, are you able to paint a picture for us, whether you start in Genesis and end in Revelation? It can be a sweep or whatever, but some kind of orientation there.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's hard to answer briefly without, giving kind of a superficial overview. But totally. I think Genesis 1 and 2 is incredibly significant for understanding the basics of human nature, the basics of sexuality, sexual expression, marriage. It doesn't give us all the details. It's not going to answer all our questions, but it does give us a foundation. And this is, the work that I primarily deal with is in questions related to LGBTQ questions, same-sex sexuality, transgender identities. And oftentimes in that conversation, people race to, Leviticus or Romans, which, Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, Romans 1 is one of the few passages that directly prohibits same-sex relationships. And some people just go straight there. And I'm like, no, we got to go back to the very beginning to look at the fundamental makeup of humanity as a sexual being. So Genesis 1 and 2, you've got a beautiful array of equality and differences playing off each other. You see it in the creation account in Genesis 1. Day and night and land and sea and evening and morning, and these kind of differences, these binaries, if you will, dancing together as they sing God's praise in creation. And woven into that is the creation of humanity as male and female, so that male and female are both different and yet they're equal. And we don't need to diminish the difference in order to establish equality, which is kind of a trend you see especially today in certain movements. They want to downplay the sex differences in order to accomplish equality. The Bible just doesn't go that direction. It elevates both, celebrates our differences and celebrates our equality. So and then of course at the end of Genesis 1 you have the famous marriage passage: a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And that one flesh union has to do with these differences that have been being laid out in Genesis 1 and 2. At the climax of Genesis 2, they come together in this one flesh union. And one significant reason for that, and I don't want to get all Catholic on you, but one significant reason for that is procreation. That was one of the first commands given to humanity, is be fruitful and multiply, and that command is woven into the very makeup of this sexual union. And again, there's the way the Bible treats sex and procreation, there's some diversity there, but I just think the way the Bible starts out is very different than how maybe a secular sexual ethic will start out. Of, hey, if you love this person, feels good, you're not hurting anybody, kind of like, as long as it's consensual, it's not harmful, then go for it, especially if it's going to bring you desires. And it's like the Bible just doesn't, that's not the foundation for sexual ethics in terms of a biblical view, but that's kind of the twin pillars of a secular ethic, is consensuality and, don't hurt anybody else.
So when it comes to, that's helpful. Thank you. When it comes to so there's that narrative sweep. A lot of people will take that image and then pull out do's and don'ts. And I was just curious how you communicate that proactively instead of, I guess, reactively.
That's a great question. And, I think one of the dangers of, for instance, the purity culture, the purity movement that was popular back in the 90s and early 2000s is that it didn't really present a sexual ethic as very different than a secular sexual ethic. It basically took a secular sexual ethic and said, and just added a footnote, like wait until marriage. But the whole idea of like romance, and you're not going to flourish until you have sex, and if you do the right thing, God will bless you with tons of great sex, because if you're not having great sex, you're not going to flourish. And if you don't get married by the time you're 25, you're going to be lonely and depressed, and all this stuff that is not in the Bible, but is absorbed from culture. But then the great contribution that we have made as Christians is, but wait until you get married. That's it. Beyond that, our sexual ethic traditionally has looked very secular. So so yeah, I think that's where if we simply begin with a bunch of do's and don'ts, that's just a bad starting point. We need to start with not what are the do's and don'ts of sexuality, but what is sex for? What is marriage for? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be an embodied, sexed image bearer of God? Like some of these real fundamental questions about humanity. I mean, our anthropology, if you will, should precede our sexuality. We need to look at what it means to be human, and the purpose of marriage and sex before we get into what exploring the guardrails that God has put on us.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It's, well, just as far as method goes, that's a clean one. I believe his name is David Dennett. He is he's a gay Christian. He practiced celibacy. He studied under N.T. Wright and
David Bennett, yeah.
Bennett, thank you, yeah. And his methodology is pretty anchored in the eschaton, in the consummation of the ages, when it comes to even marriage, where it's a lot of people do see marriage as the point, and so that itself is the end. And he's like, well, no, like marriage itself is a reflection. It's a really good reflection, but it's a reflection nonetheless. And it's only a reflection. There are a lot of other ways that eternity is reflected back to us, to kind of give us that telos, to use a nerdy word. And I've appreciated that as well, as far as telling the story and giving just a positive way, even when it comes to longing and intimacy, to say again the anthropology of no, we're designed to be known, to be cherished, to be loved, to be intimate, that is to be human, and I appreciate those markers as well, kind of getting in front of the reaction, so to speak. Yeah,
no, that's good. Yeah, and yeah, he's a brilliant dude, and yeah, a lot of Christian ethicists, they look at kind of creation and resurrection as the twin pillars of a Christian ethic, and we see this in the life of Jesus when he's asked about divorce in Matthew 19, and he goes back to Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Paul often, when he's, urging churches to act ethically, he uses the resurrection as kind of that focal point of, since we're going to be like this, then let's start living like this now. So that creation, resurrection, push and pull is the foundation for Christian ethics. But even now, I mean, some people listening, you might say, I've been at church for 30 years, never even heard that. But if you, I guess that's part of the problem too. If all we do is focus on do's and don'ts, not an underlying, if I can say, substructure of a biblical sexual ethic, then just telling people do this, don't do that. We've seen it's been ineffective. I mean, you guys deal with a lot of porn and porn addictions. If telling people stop it, it's wrong, does that work? I mean,
yeah.
And I'm not saying there's an easy answer to what does work, but I think at least part of the problem is we've taken on just a really thin view of what sex is for and why God has created it.
Yeah, Nancy Piercy is good with In Love Thy Body. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not.
It's a great book. Yeah.
It's awesome. But she, we tend to look at things almost in the West kind of forensically, just reminiscence of the Enlightenment and modernism and whatnot. And we really do just embody stories, and stories do capture us. And so even the story behind secularism of if you have sex with feelings, then you might get hurt, right? So then you're disempowered because of that. Getting hurt means that you're a victim. And so having sex and not caring thus allows you to be empowered. So the one who cares the least is the one who's the most empowered. And that's the story, in secularism. And it is an enticing one because no one wants to get hurt and everyone wants to be known, and they've just been hurt, So it's a twist on irony, because just because you think that something won't hurt you if you practice it this way doesn't mean it won't hurt you. There are a lot of people that are seriously devastated by the way they practice their sexual ethic within hookup culture and porn culture, and it's wrecking them, and a lot of times they don't even know it.
Yeah. Are you seeing hookup a bigger problem maybe inside the church than people might realize? Or
are you asking that question?
Yeah.
Yeah, subtly. I mean, even what we were talking about earlier, pornography is definitely a bigger problem inside the church than we realize. I I think that a majority of millennial churchgoers and the younger generation seem to have a pretty, like, it's almost like this assumption that the Christian ethic has failed. So it's like they go to church for a lot of good reasons, but a sexual ethic typically isn't one of them. And so like even in our groups where we go and we lead these in churches, like a lot of guys use dating apps, and like that's there's something intuitive inside of them that says like, this is devastating me, that's why I'm at this group. But a lot of times they don't actually know it's wrong. They just know it's instinctively wrong because it's hurting them, and they don't really know what to do with that. So we definitely see it inside of the church, and it's something we wrestle with. So yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah,
I mean, I knew the porn problem was pretty much almost the same in terms of inside, outside the church, but hookup, I know certain churches I talk to, it's a bigger problem where youth, especially youth groups and stuff, it's kind of like, it's so normalized. And if it's not even really addressed in the home or at the church,
totally, they're
kind of shocked when like, oh wait, no, if I go to a party, I shouldn't be giving oral sex to this guy that I just met. He's super cute. I'm not,
totally.
He gave me attention. He gave me a ride home or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that stuff is gnarly, honestly. I mean, we see it in like even like middle school, where that's the standard for intimacy before a guy kisses the girl. Right? Wow. Like if she can do that well, then she's girlfriend material, And so like that's happening, that's in like grade schools and whatnot. And honestly, like the issue is massive. And most of the time we're scratching our heads, or our hearts are just bleeding, and we're just praying, we're just on our knees. But like, it's definitely bleeding into the church.